With the release of the brand new Plastic Hetzer kit for Flames of War, I thought I would take this as an opportunity to show you how to paint some more 15mm scaled tanks. I'm Pete the Wargamer, and in this tutorial I'll be showing you how I painted this Hetzer using some of the Vallejo range of paints to do so. Before I began painting this miniature, I applied a primer coat. This was so that the later layers of paint can properly adhere to the miniature's surface. I had used Vallejo's black airbrush primer here, but any airbrush, aerosol or brush-on primers would suffice. It's only important to ensure that the model is primed black. As I will be applying some dry brushing techniques in the following steps, this black primer would provide me with something that would give me some dark shadows in those recesses. To quickly apply paint to the surface of this tank and to also generate some shading in those recesses, I used a method called dry brushing. If you're not already familiar with the technique, it essentially involves loading up a fairly large brush with some paint and then removing some of the excess onto a tissue or a piece of paper until only a small amount of paint remains in the bristles. With the dry brush prepped, it can be dragged across the whole model using a series of light strokes that cover large areas of the vehicle. This technique causes the paint to be transferred only to the hard edged details and flat surfaces, but the deeper recesses remain untouched. Because of the black primer, these areas remain black and therefore help to create the illusion of shadows in these areas. Dry brushing is not only incredibly quick, but it's also exceptionally easy. You can cover a large area fairly quickly when compared to more conventional application methods. It's incredibly effective at creating the appearance of shading and gradients without the need for techniques such as glazing or blending. The colour I chose for this first step was saddle brown, and this was applied to the entirety of the tank. This reddish brown colour would form the first part of this three-toned camouflage that I'll be creating on this Hetzer. It's a great approximation of the red oxide primer colour of German vehicles and would also provide a better surface to apply some of the later shades as well. With the saddle brown base colour of the vehicle achieved, I had a good starting point for applying the rest of the camouflage pattern, but before I could start applying this camouflage, I first wanted to give some of the raised details and hard edges of the Hetzer a little more definition. This was done with a mixture of the original saddle brown and a roughly equal amount of stone grey. This created a lighter red oxide colour that was then dry brushed over the hard edge details of the tank. As the lighter mixture formed over the edges, this boosted their contrast against the saddle brown surfaces and the near black recessed areas, really helping those details to stand out. Now that the Hetzer had its first third of the camouflage pattern, as well as a little detailing, I could begin the camouflage stripes. The first colour that I chose to use was Refractive Green, and this was applied with some further dry brushing. However, as the step required me to apply something with more focus, I used a smaller, flat bristled brush instead. The smaller profile of this brush allowed me to more easily apply these green bands over the tank surface. I used some reference photos to help me out here, but the basic principle of this involved painting a series of thick bands that snaked across the vehicle's hull. The additional benefit of using the dry brush technique is that the shaded recesses and the highlighted edges should still show through that green paint, helping to retain that level of detail previously achieved. The final step in completing the camouflage pattern was to use some of the paint dark yellow to apply some thin bands of paint adjacent to the green stripes. Instead of using a dry brush for this step, I instead used a regular brush and thinned out my paint with just a little bit of water. This yellow paint was applied to follow the green stripes, and by mixing just a little bit of water into this mixture, I not only made the paint much easier to apply, but it also helped with some of that pre-shading to show through. Now that the base colours of the vehicle had been established, I could start to work on some of the stowage items. I began with some German camo medium brown, and this was used to pick out some of the wooden equipment. This included the wooden block and the front of the vehicle, as well as some of the tool handles. Continuing with the stowage items, I then started to paint some of the metallic parts of the model using some black grey. This extremely dark grey colour is perfect for creating the appearance of a blackened steel. In addition to applying this over some of the tools, I also tackled the rubber trim of the road wheels with it too. The final task in painting this Hetzer was to apply a black wash. Washes can be used to help enhance certain details by creating stronger shading in the recesses and therefore boosting contrast. But washes can be applied over the entire model as they naturally pull into recesses, but this time around I didn't want to darken down the surfaces too much as the dry brushing had already achieved a lot of the shading that I required. So instead I focused my application of the black wash directly into the deeper recesses as well as around some of the details like the tools and vents. Essentially, it was used to help bring out some of the shading in anywhere that was maybe looking a little too flat. And with that, the model was very nearly finished. It just needed a coat of matte varnish, which left me with this. And here we have the completed Hetzer painted in a 3-tone camouflage. Now, whilst I focus on just one specific technique in this video, you could easily apply the same colours and techniques to other later war German vehicles too. You can find a full list of all the paints used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video. And if you enjoyed this return to a smaller scale, then please do let me know in the comments as well. If you enjoyed this video, then please do subscribe to be kept up to date with all of my latest tutorials. And so, the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching and goodbye.